Oh, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the first webinar in our Ask a Sage Expert series, The Quest for the Golden Ledger, a Smart Rules Adventure. My name is Ali Pakalnis, and I will help facilitate our webinar. Before we get started, here are a few tips on using the Zoom platform so you can engage with our presenters and have the best experience possible. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions live. Or if you prefer, you can use the Ask a Question feature to type them in. If you need any assistance, click on the Raise Your Hand button and I will connect with you to help. Within 72 hours of the webinar, you will receive a link to download the slide deck and recorded presentation. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today, Sam Narlock and Joseph Akbena.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam. I am a senior consultant with Armanino, working on the Sage Intacct implementation team. I've been doing this for about 3 years as an implementer and worked a few years as an end user before that in a few different accounting positions. I also live in Seattle, and I'm super excited to take you all on this adventure today.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. My name is Joseph, Solution Architect for Armanino. I've been with the firm for 7+ years now, doing Intacct implementations. I specialize in any integration and customization related. Anything that integrates in and out of Intacct and any customization in Intacct, I specialize in that. So if I have any questions on anything custom, just let us know.
All right. Our adventure today is going to take us through these three missions or these three objectives. So we're going to talk a little bit about smart rules, smart events, and dimension relationships. The idea is to get some ideas going about how these can be used to streamline and automate processes in Intacct. So the first mission that we're going to look at is unlocking the power of smart rules to automate vendor 1099 requirements. The second mission we're going to look at is using smart events to automate invoice descriptions. Finally, we're going to look at exploring best practices with dimension relationships and how those can be utilized in Intacct. And just as a reminder, we'll say this a couple times throughout this presentation, but anybody can come off mute and ask questions, and also feel free to utilize the chat as well and the Q&A. So, next. All right, so our adventure today, we're doing a sort of choose your own adventure. So with each of these missions, we're going to show kind of what the scenario is that is causing a bottleneck or causing an issue. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe some standard solutions that can work to get the job done and maybe push things through, but may not be a best fit. Finally, we're also going to talk about the tools that we've mentioned. So smart events, smart rules, and dimension relationships, and how those can be utilized to offer a better solution, streamlining and making things easier.
Yeah, with that, our first adventure at our disposal is something that is very relevant right now, especially in the upcoming tax season, is your vendor 1099 requirements. Okay, so we go to the next one. Um, Problem that we may encounter today, literally today, or in the upcoming few months, is where's the W9? So inside the vendor record, you can actually attach an attachment. You can attach whatever you want. We usually recommend attaching the W9s in there, but sometimes in this case, the scenario is that the AP clerk always forgets to attach the W9 forms into into the vendor record, right? So what happens is during tax season, you're looking for that, can't file the 1099s properly. just maybe you're reaching out to your vendor that you've done business a year ago, right? They probably have forgotten about you at that point. But yeah, we want to make sure that we capture those W9s on the front end. Okay. So a good solution is not really fixing the issue. It's reviewing the W9s on during tax season. It's you guys are busy, you probably are closing your books, you're in the middle of filing your 1099s for both your employees and vendors. So you don't have time for that. You want to make sure that you guys have that it is captured on the front end. Okay. So what is a better solution? We utilize smart rules. What are smart rules? So smart rules are conditions that generate a warning or an error message to the user. Mainly, in short, those put internal controls into your system. Okay. Um, Bonus points. So we can enable the attachment on the vendor only for 1099able vendors only, right? If it's an incorporation or S corp, they're not a 1099able vendor, so an attachment is not required at that point. Okay. So how to add smart rules into the system? So there's a bit of code in here. I'll talk about that in a sec. It will become much clearer as we talk about this. But on the top level, if you log into your Intacct instance, on the top level, there's the platform services in there. Um, if for some reason you don't see platform services, if you only have customization services, for example, we can freely upgrade you to platform services. Call Intacct, call us, and we can upgrade you at no charge, basically. There's really no reason why you should not have platform services. So on the top level, go to platform services, then create a smart rule. It's a multi-step wizard. So step one is it's asking you which object where you want to add um the internal controls, right? In this case, we want to make sure that our vendor attachment is in there, right? So that's our object, our vendor. Step two, there's a few types that can happen in here. So either Intact gives you an error message when you fail to meet the conditions. So let's say in this case, there's no attachment, right? Either Intact will give you an error message, meaning you can't move on and post or save the transaction. Um, if you fail to meet that condition, or Intact will give you a warning, right? And you'll have to save again to basically ignore the warning, right? So that's the type. Events in there. There's the add and set, and there's a few more things in there. The most popular one is add and set. Um, and this is where you want the smart event, or I'm sorry, the smart rule to apply, right? So in this case, we don't want to save the vendor if there's no attachment and set is edit. So nobody can just attach something in there, right? Attach a W9 file in the vendor record upon saving, but come in there, edit it, and remove it, right? So we always, always, always want that attachment to be on the vendor record. Okay. The condition in there, there's a bit of code, but if you follow me closely in here, what this is basically saying is if the vendor's 1099 box is not blank and there's no attachment, Intact will generate an error upon posting. Okay. We want to have an added rationale in there, only because we don't want this to run for any non-1099able vendors, right? So the added rationale at the very bottom in there is if the vendor 1099 box is blank, then no errors are given, right? It's okay. It's completely fine. All right. Yeah, with this, with smart rules, this ensures that you have the W9s on file on the front end and you're not rushing and making sure that you guys have it on during the tax season. Okay. Want to pause, right, real quick? If there's any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to put it in chat. Can't find platform services. If you have any issues on the smart rules, then feel free to ping us. Call Sam and I. Right? Okay. All right. Continuing on, our next adventure at our disposal in here is smart invoice description. So let's go through the scenario. So in this case, you're a software company, okay? And you basically want different varying messages on the header of the invoice. So if you look at the screenshot, it should look familiar. It's the order entry module. It can work for accounts receivable as well. Basically, you're creating an invoice and you want that message to change depending on the department of your line, right? So if your department is software, we want the message to say monthly fees include overage users. If the department is professional services, we want the message to say detailed hours are provided upon request, so on and so forth. Okay. Um, the good solution, you just type it in. Again, it's not a solution. It's not really solving the problem. Uh, the AP team might forget. They might have wrong spellings in there. They might switch the message as well, depending on if they're not paying attention on what the department is. Basically, we're introducing human element in there, which could be prone to errors. Okay. A better solution is actually using smart events. So smart events remove the human element in there and actually places automation in your system. Okay. So if you follow me in this rationale, what we're saying in here is that, let's say the department on line one, right? Let's say the department on line one is software. Once you save that, that wakes up the smart event. So the smart event is triggered. Once the smart event is triggered, it updates the header invoice with the message, with whatever message you want to put in. All right. Um, so what are smart events? Smart events are triggers when given events occurs and certain conditions are met. So basically those put in automation into your system. It's a multi-step wizard as well. Step one, in this case, in my example, it's the order entry module. Okay. Could work for accounts receivable as well if you guys don't have order entry. So step one, again, same thing with smart rules. It lets you choose which object you want the automation to take place. In this case, we want it to be done in order entry. Step two is which action do you want it to happen? Actually, I have yep. Um, step two is what action. So either an API or an email. So an email, pretty popular as well. Let's say you want Intacct to auto send you an email if you do something in the system. We have some clients that uh where if a vendor or a customer or a project is edited, they want Intacct to auto send an email to to the admin, to IT, to whomever, to the controller, right? We can do that as well. Events is which where do you want this smart event to take place? So either you add it or unset. Conditions and API body, I'll talk about that in a sec. But make sure to I added the developer website in there. It's to um that's the where you'll find the API body. Okay. All right. So how is it done? Again, go to platform services and go to smart events this time. Yeah, and let's follow the screenshot in here. So step one is we're basically creating it in the order entry module in the sales invoice process. Number two, we want the action to be an API, and the event to we want the event to happen upon saving or editing the transaction. On number two, there's that rationale in there. So if you follow me in here, what we're basically saying in there is we want this action to only happen on the first line of the invoice and in department 201 only. If it's not department 201, the smart event will not will not fire. Okay. Number three is basically your APR argument. So this is where the developer website comes into play. Um, Feel free to follow my code in there. Basically what we're seeing in here is that we're editing the header of the transaction, changing the message field in the invoice and saying, I want to hard key the words monthly fees include overage users. And what would happen is that if the department is software, so this is a screenshot of an invoice doc in Intacct, an example in invoice doc in Intacct. So the message field would say monthly fees include overage users if the department is software. And but if the department is support, it would change it to upgrade to platinum support for immediate turnaround. Okay. So there's no human element. Intacct does it automatically. If for whatever reason the department changes to support or vice versa, the message would change with it. Okay. So pretty popular. Loads of customization we've seen out there. Um, and yeah, and just let us know if there's any questions. Okay. All right. All right. And I'll pass it over to the other expert in our team, which is Sam.
All right. Thank you, Joseph, for taking us through those first two missions. Our third mission that we're going to look at now is how you can use how you can use dimension relationships to auto-populate fields on transactions. So if we go to our next slide, our scenario for this is this organization, the accounting team really needs to be able to report on all of these dimensions for every transaction, or at least every expense that's coming through. Now, the users that are entering these transactions are manually selecting all of these fields every single time they're entering a transaction. It can be tedious, and as we saw with some of our previous missions, this is prone to human error. Things could get missed, or incorrect fields could be selected. Now, when somebody goes to run a financial report, that could result in missing transactions, depending on the report that you're running, which could cause, of course, a lot of different issues. A good solution that could work is to require dimensions on the GL account. So that's what we see here. This is already built into Intacct. So within each GL account, a user can determine if certain dimensions are required when that GL account is selected in a transaction. This at least requires it to be filled in. So if a financial report is ran, you know that everything is captured. This does not account for if an incorrect dimension is selected, and it also doesn't streamline the process. The user still has to go in and fill in each piece. So what's our better solution? That would be dimension relationships. So what we can do is create a dimension relationship. And by doing that, when a user selects a single dimension, that will act as a driver and push other dimension fields to populate. So in short, at the bottom there, it says it auto-populates your dimensions for you. So our next slide, we'll talk about how this works. So in this example, we can see on the line, there's a GL account, a program, and then a series of dimensions. In this case, the program is what a user would select, and then the other dimensions such as location, department, donor, and restriction are all going to autofill.
Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. So we're good. So in this case, a user can just select the single program. Everything else is going to auto-populate, and they save time. They're only entering, one or two fields as opposed to entering 6 fields every single time. This also ensures that the proper location, department, donor, and restriction are selected that relate to that program. So in this case, it's actually a twofer where it's saving time and ensuring more accuracy. So how do these dimension relationships work? Similar to the smart rules and smart events, you'll want to navigate to platform services at the top level in your environment. You're going to navigate to the object list and find whatever your driver dimension is. In this case, we used program. Find that dimension, click into it, and then navigate to the relationships list, which is partway down the page. You can add a new relationship and choose the other dimension or dimensions that you want to relate to. You do have to set them up individually, so one at a time. And in this case, we related all 4. So we set up relationships for department, location, donor, and restriction back to the program. Next step. Within each relationship, you're choosing whether they're one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, or many-to-many. Most often, these relationships are many-to-one. We do often see many-to-many as well for a different use case scenario. What this does is restrict the relationships down. So, for example, if your programs need to if you have a program that needs to be entirely unrestricted expenses, that's a good example of all of your programs could go to one unrestricted restriction. So next. Some other options that you can do with setting up dimension relationships. If you navigate to your driver object and edit next to the object, there's a couple options here. Of course, we see the autofill related objects checkbox that will need to be checked. The second checkbox here is optional. So you can have the, in this case, program selected and then other dimensions such as location and donor we're autofilling in. If you want a user to then be able to go in and override those autofills, you can check this box. What this does is give a user an option. So if it's most of the time we're using this program with this department, but maybe occasionally it does need to be a different department, you can still build that in to have that flexibility. One other thing you can do with dimension relationships that's not listed here is create a narrowed down list. So if, for example, you need a user to select a program and only see 3 or 4 departments related to that and have them choose from that list, you can create those narrowed down lists as well. Next. The last step with creating your dimension relationships is to actually fill in the individual values. So in this case, you would choose within each program, the related, they have grant and functional expenses highlighted here, but you would also see restriction and donor, things like that. Once those are autofilled, or once those are set up, the autofill will work in the system as long as the user is using the user interface within Intacct.
And just a added point there, we're just showing this to you in the user interface, right? In the screenshot in the user interface. Once those relationships are set up, we can actually mass populate it either via Excel templates. Sometimes Intacct does not allow Excel updates for certain dimensions in Intacct, but we can always do it via the API on the backend. So if you have thousands and thousands of transactions you want to update, and there's no import to update it, we can do it via the backend. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely let us know if there's any questions on dimension relationships, how those can be set up, or if there's any ideas for dimension relationships you might want to try, and you need help figuring those out. We could definitely offer advice on any of that. Same thing with the smart event and the smart rules. So if we go to our next slide here, I think. So just a quick reminder of everything we've gone through today, our 3 different missions. So we looked at using smart rules to enforce vendor 1099 requirements. So that's a good example of an internal control. We looked at using smart events to automate AR invoice descriptions, so streamlining processes and keeping things consistent. And then finally, creating and utilizing dimension relationships, keeping things in line and ensuring that proper values are selected on each transaction. So again, if anybody has any immediate questions about any of these, feel free to come off mute or throw them in the Q&A. We did have a couple other questions that we could address as well. So I just want to give some time for both. Anybody has any? One of the other questions related to a topic that came up today was, does Intacct have a 1099 report that can be used? And while this doesn't directly relate to the smart event shown, the answer is yes. In the accounts payable module, there is a 1099 report that can be used to see what transactions and what vendor 1099 balances are currently. That does include some other filtering options as well. So that can be very helpful to run and see where things are at, and then maybe decide you do need this rule.
I'm not sure if you noticed, but if you open up the module in Intacct, let's say the AP module, right? In this case, the first and second column are always transactional columns. The third column are always reports. So that's where you can run your AP aging, your AP subledger reports, and that's where you can run your 1099 reports as well, as I mentioned. And you can filter that based on year, and you can just run your NSC box one or miscellaneous rent 1099s, right? So uh, it's very, very filterable.
One other question that came up today was about financial statements. And the question was specifically asking about separating direct versus indirect costs. That may relate to using dimension relationships. If the question we would have then would be, how are you as an organization tracking your direct versus indirect costs in Intacct? Is that one of your dimensions? Is that a set of GL accounts? There are definitely ways to kind of review that and streamline those processes, and some of these might apply to that as well. So we'll, to the person that asked that question, we'll send some follow-up, but just wanted to throw that out there too. Okay. I think that was our last question that we had that I see. So,
Okay. All right.
all right. Uh, thank you everybody for your time today. This is just some information about our next webinar in this series. So talking about navigating the depths of efficiency. Again, this is within Sage Intacct. So we'll have some presenters discussing ways to streamline further. So that'll be on April 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific. So. And then finally,
Yeah.
thank you everybody.
Mhm. Yeah. If there's any questions, if you have any um if you have ideas on everything that we've discussed, putting in controls in your system, or if there's something that you're just constantly doing that you want Intact to automate for you, then there's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help.